So let's talk about the forces of the Unforgiven on the tabletop in Warhammer 40K, with an overview of the gameplay of the Dark Angels. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Dark Angels, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of the forces of the Unforgiven, and some of their stronger options to put on the tabletop currently. The Dark Angels had their codex come out in early 10th edition, and it was generally really quite badly received, most of their unique units being very underwhelming compared with just the generic standard Space Marine things, and after some experimentation the same was more or less true of their detachments, and that still feels like an annoying feature for them, generally doing far better with the core codex things like Gladius and Stormlance currently, as opposed to their unique stuff. Games Workshop did give them some helpful rules improvements though, Deathwing Knights getting a massive boost to their melee profile, and the same for the Inner Circle Companions, and Lionel Johnson got a big points drop, and between all that and the changes to Codex Space Marines over the past year or so, they're now maybe in a sort of lower mid sort of place in Warhammer 40k power ratings, Grand Tournament win rates of around about 46% or so definitely in the running but not at the top of the game's power balance, and kind of middling played at the moment, around about 16th out of the 27 factions in the game depending on whose count you look at. For this video I thought I'd do a general overview of the faction, talking through some of their strongest options in terms of unique units, and also going through all the rest with a few thoughts as to their pros and cons, then talking through some of their strongest detachments currently with some example army lists, and rounding up some of their positives and negatives. Loads to talk about, so let's jump in and talk about Dark Angels in current 40k. The Dark Angels can both take their unique units, plus plenty of other powerful generic options from core Codex Space Marines, and I thought first we could talk through their standout unique units, then going through the rest of their unique options, and then focused on a few generic supporting picks for competitive tournament play at the moment, at least with maybe their more common Gladius and Stormlance builds. Maybe the most commonly played unique units for them are the Deathwing Knights, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael, and the Inner Circle Companions, with Lionel Johnson himself being played in some army lists, but not all of them. Beyond that, their Raven-winged units definitely have some interest as well. Samael, the Black Knights, and the Command Squad get some interest, and more so in their themed detachments. Both Stormlance and Company of Hunters have some synergies, though unfortunately a lot of the rest tends to be kind of rarely played, at least for strong armies most of the time. Starting with the most played stuff, first up we have the Inner Circle Companions. These guys are the non-speaking Totally Not Fallen, going in with their Calibanite greatswords to cut down the enemy, and often serving as bodyguards. You can field them between a 3 and 6 man squad. They have 3 wounds apiece, and they're -1 to hit if they're led by a character, and then they have some really quite nice general purpose melee profiles. 4 attacks apiece at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2 with lethal hit, and also have a sweep mode. They get a damage buff against character units too. In competitive play, they're far more commonly played in units of 6 versus units of 3, needy enough to have sort of critical melee mass. Sometimes they act as a bodyguard for Azrael, as they get on well with his invulnerable save and his sustained hits, though Judas here could be a great option as well, giving them fights first and some extra nasty melee attacks, and Librarians work pretty well with them too, as they're just so much more tanky with an invulnerable save. In a 2000 point list, it's often between 1 or 2 units for a lot of armies. You could potentially put them in an Impulsor as a nice place to stage out of and charge down the enemy, though it's very much not mandatory in the detachments that can advance and charge like Stormlance and Gladius. However they're set up, they're going to need a big focus on getting the jump on the enemy rather than the other way around. They're not crazily fragile with the -1 to hit and the 3 wounds, but they're not really all that tanky either. They'll likely want to be hiding behind ruins and then jumping on something in the midboard. Ideally medium or heavy infantry will be a particularly nice target, but with lethal hits and maybe some synergies from detachments, they should have a fair shout at destroying most things. With a Judas here, they could be interesting for heroic intervention as well. For the other big elite staple unit, and the more commonly played of the two if anything, are the Deathwing Knights. These guys are 250 points for a 5 model unit. They're obscenely tanky with 4 wounds at toughness 5 with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save. The Inner Circle special rule for a -1 damage, access to Armour of Contempt, and the Watcher in the Dark, even as a ward against mortal wounds. It's kind of crazy to need a damage 5 attack to one-shot one of these guys. They're most commonly fielded with Maces of Absolution, which get you a bunch of attacks with anti-monster and anti-vehicle keywords, so they're really quite general purpose against everything, and then a weapon with devastating wounds on the Knight Master. They're really common staples in Gladius and Stormlance, and might often be fielded in maybe 2 or 3 squads of 5 of them. In terms of in-game support, most of the time they're fielded without characters, though I guess you could go with a Terminator Chaplain if you were taking the power weapons. Basically anything that gives them more damage and defense is going to be really nice. Armour of Contempt is good. Advanced and charge stratagems or things to help them deal more damage are all going to be very good. For most people, most of the time I'd be more tempted to start them on the board and move up to dominate the mid-board objectives with their sheer might, and it's quite nice to have a unit that, if anything is going to be exposed and taking damage from the enemy, these guys are generally going to be quite a good choice, though obviously still doesn't hurt to shield them from a turn or so of fire if it's possible and convenient. Depending on the opposing army, they could be a potential rapid ingress threat as well, particularly as they can tank a bunch of damage, so they could land fairly freely. The main goal for them is to not have them ignored, and that's definitely a possibility with slow-moving elite infantry. With big damage and defense, you don't want the opponent just falling back from them and leaving them hanging, so definitely some big incentive to be fairly aggressive with them. Then for Dark Angel staples, we've got Azrael. At the moment, he's thoroughly auto-include in Dark Angel's list, 115 points for a character that gives you a 4+ invulnerable save for your unit and sustained hits 1, so a nice boost to damage and defense, has some good melee damage in himself, and then perhaps best of all gives you a 1 command point free per turn, which is pretty big value and makes up a huge chunk of his cost. He's just really hard to pass up at the moment. Maybe the units that most favour him could be the Assault Intercessors, Regular Intercessors, or the Inner Circle Companions perhaps. It is basically impossible to go too far wrong with him though. In general, if you're fielding him with the Intercessors, then usually he gets used kind of conservatively, holding him back somewhere in the deployment zone and not being shot, spending maybe 2 or 3 turns generating command points, and then pushing forward to scrap for the mid-board objectives with the high OC of the Intercessors in the late game and putting his melee profile to use. Assault Intercessors can make him more dangerous with their rerolls, regular Intercessors can sticky the home field objective, and potentially if the opponent's not going to be threatening it, you could just literally fully move off it and fight for the mid-board with him and some Intercessors, and know that you'll still be scoring it. The Inner Circle Companions and maybe Hellblasters make quite good use of his sustained hits 1 and 4+ invulnerable save. There might be a lot more incentive to get him stuck in early with that though, which might be a little bit counter to his command point farming thing. Ideally he's a model that doesn't want to be in transport, as that turns off his command point generation, so maybe not the best idea there. Then finally for maybe some of their more common staple units, Lionel Johnson is definitely not auto-include, but still sees play in a whole bunch of lists. He's got a big and tanky Primarch stat line, costing 315 points with a 3+ invulnerable save and 10 wounds, fairly massive melee damage with 16 attack, damage 2 sweeps, or 8 attacks and damage 4 strikes, which is all the more intimidating for melee armies with fights first. His buffing rules maybe are a little bit on the situational side. If the enemy's got mortal wounds to throw at him, then it's probably a good idea to have that one. The +1 to hit or the stratagem disruption both could be handy in the right situation though. You could pair him with a combi lieutenant to trigger his lone operative if you wanted. It's kind of funny that people tend to be quite polarised about him. Some people saying that he's overpowered and some people saying that he's overcosted, perhaps depending a bit on the list and the situation. In general, for using him, I'd be more tempted to start him on the board once again, particularly in the advance and charge detachments, and then needs to move forward to the midfield while stopping himself getting shot. Lone operative and terrain should be good enough for that though. He can move through ruined walls now, due to the errata that Games Workshop gave him, and he can certainly make himself a big problem for melee units that just might not be able to tank his fight's first damage that he has. He could be a real problem to just threaten to outright kill a lot of melee armies that might want to charge him first. And the fights first could also mean that he really helpfully supports other units with heroic intervention. It's certainly a model that might have to think really closely about what decisions he's going to make, as at 315 points he's got massive amounts of threat and can absolutely destroy things, but you can't really afford to either play him too cagey and not impact the battle enough, but you also can't just march him to the front of the enemy army and get him shot by a whole bunch of heavy weapons and killed, as that could be a big chunk of your army lost too easily. Next up, we'll talk through the other Dark Angels units, though before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold, and they're one option for magnetic Warhammer 40K miniature storage. The idea being that you put lots of magnets on your miniature bases, which can keep them on the steel trays here without sliding around and keep them nice and compact for transport. They've got a 25% off sale at time of recording, though it's not on for that much longer. Their specific offering for the magnetic carry cases are these mag cases. It's basically a notably sturdy MDF box, and in the box are a whole bunch of layers of steel trays. You can raise or lower them to different levels to suit the style of model that you want to transport, and then the front of it has a nice acrylic sheet for front display and seeing what's where exactly. It is quite fun to have painted miniatures on display while being stored and transported. Broadly speaking, reviews of these have been really quite good from reports I've seen on Reddit and down in the YouTube comments if they do want a tailor-made magnet case. If you're looking for a board of terrain as well, they've got a competitive terrain set that's a little bit cheaper if you buy a mag case. In any case, feel free to check them out, linked down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff. I'll also cycle back to them at the end of the video to talk through a few specific models of them, so check back at the end of the video if you'd like to see that. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, we've got the Raven Wing forces of the army. In general, they tend to be a bit more niche versus the Deathwing and the Inner Circle companions. I suspect in no small part due to them being firstborn models and people generally tailoring their collections to focus on the new stuff, but after some big updates that Games Workshop did for them around about Christmas time, they have been having a little bit more success on the tournament tables. Besides generic Space Marine picks that get the keywords, the Black Knights see a bit of play, still a bit more expensive versus the Outriders, and have one less wound but they have some more threat, getting devastating wound melee. and a bunch of plasma talon shots, they're reasonable enough as a skirmish unit. Though often when they get fielded, it can be in a big block of 6 of them led by a Raven Wing command squad. These guys can bear enhancements for Company of Hunters for the various flavours of Alpha Strike that can bring. Add some more scary bodies to the unit and some decent enough melee with the mastercrafted power weapons of the champion, but also do other fun stuff as well, reviving models, giving them extra OC, and a +1 to advance and charge doesn't hurt their threat range either. Otherwise, I've seen at least a few people using Samael as well. The Grandmaster of the Raven Wing on his jet bike has a plasma cannon and some fairly nice hitting melee. It's perhaps kind of tempting to run him with Outriders though, and maybe just a small squad of them, as they can give him a +1 damage on the charge, which might take his melee from kind of incidental to quite a big threat against elite infantry. Particularly the Black Knights and the command squads get way better in the Company of Hunters, where they've just got a lot more tailored support for them. Moving on, let's talk through the other Unforgiven options, which as mentioned don't really tend to see quite so much tournament play unfortunately. Ezekiel's the Librarian-in-Chief for 75 points. His main buff is a +1 attack, so can be alright with some melee units. Maybe has a little bit of draw to the Librarian's Conclave, but it's just not really all that standout versus all the more standard Primaris characters that you can field. Asmodai similarly gives you a melee buff, re-rolling the hit roll with his Exemplar of Hate, and has a Crozius with a bit of AP. Again, he could be alright with Blade Guard or maybe Inner Circle Companions, though I feel like often people get more tempted to add things that can help out against tough stuff when you're leading foot troops. I think that's one of the reasons why he doesn't tend to see quite so much play. Maybe versus Lieutenants or Chaplains, he's definitely not unusable though. Lazarus is 70 points, he gives you Fight on Death and has some anti-psyker rules. Those potentially could be genuinely powerful against the right foe, but you need to expect to be fighting psykers before he turns up to get the most value out of him. Perhaps not quite so much use unless they're everywhere in the meta or you're doing list tailoring. Belial's the Master of the Death Wing and he got quite a fun updated miniature. His rules though I think could have used more of an update. He gives precision to his unit on critical hits, plus the chance to bounce some mortal wounds back in melee. Again, definitely not nothing, but just not standout for 85 points. The precision thing just isn't reliably useful enough to make it a huge draw for him personally, and any character could access precision if they desperately need it for 1 command point via epic challenge. The Ravenwing Darkshroud has occasionally seen some interest in protecting some Space Marine gunline vehicles. It can give stealth and the benefit of cover for units within 6 inches. Occasionally people have run that alongside Storm Ravens for an unusually tanky flyer. Cover is often at least kind of easy to get outside of aircraft though in 40k, but still the aura of stealth isn't unhelpful. It just pays quite a lot of points to get that at 115. You need to be protecting something seriously valuable. The Land Speed of Vengeance is still a bit on the pricey side at 120 points. The plasma isn't nothing, but I feel like it really didn't need to lose its extra pip of damage as it did in the Codex. And then there's the 2 flyers, the Ravenwing Dark Talon and the Nephilim Jetfighter. They could either be used for a fast-moving Alpha Strike with hover for the Dark Talon, or zooming onto the board and seeing over ruins to be able to do an Alpha Strike on things that you wouldn't normally be able to shoot. But as ever, with aircraft in 10th edition 40k, they get rather overshadowed as Games Workshop just puts up the points so much they're just overshadowed by other gun tank style options, and there's better things out there to put on the board. Finally, we've got the regular Deathwing Terminator squad. They're 180 points, so 10 points more than the regular Space Marine version, and for that you get a Watcher in the Dark, a slightly buffed Deathwing Roar as opposed to the Fury of the first thing, plus the option of a Plasma Cannon. It does make them feel a bit more of a side grade more than a direct upgrade to the standard Terminator squad. I feel like standard Space Marine Terminators could do with going down in points just a fair bit anyway, really. At the moment, particularly for the Dark Angels, people don't really tend to take them in strong lists when you've got Deathwing Knights on offer. They might cost a fair few more points, but also hit way harder and are far tankier. Overall, between all that, I feel like Games Workshop currently has a lot of work to do to actually make Dark Angels unique units genuinely good and more tempting to put on the board at the moment. A bunch of them could probably use rules changes, but at the very least, the vast majority of them feel like they need to go down in points, some a little bit and some quite a lot. In general, it falls to maybe the more slightly Green Wing style Dark Angels to support. Space Marines aren't really too short of 5-man units with helpful special rules. Standard Intercessors are pretty nice for sticky objectives and some anti-horde. Infiltrators can hold down your deployment zone with their deep strike denial. Scouts are almost never a bad choice, being cheap units to contest the mid-board and get the Scouts and Return to Reserve rule as bonuses. As mentioned, Assault Intercessors can be pretty interesting with Azrael. For doing secondary objectives and skirmishing, Jump Intercessors are popular here as elsewhere. They'll also enjoy the advance and charge of Gladius and Stormlance, though for nuisance things to venture forward and scrap with the enemy and score points and screen. Both the Outriders and the Invader ATVs tend to do maybe a little bit unusually well for the Dark Angels, having some Raven Wing style synergies in the Company of Hunters, and benefiting quite a lot from the mounted keyword in the Stormlance task force, maybe upping their value a bit here compared with elsewhere. As mentioned, Outriders can also be interesting with Samael potentially. Hellblasters are all very iconic for the Dark Angels with their plasma as well. They could do okay with Azrael. They do tend to maybe have a reputation for being a bit stronger in casual games than at super competitive ones. As mentioned for characters, the Judas here can do well with Inner Circle companions, as can a regular Librarian. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant is a staple for most Space Marine armies, a really nice nuisance unit with reactive moves and being able to slink away unharmed. And then plenty of Space Marine lists back up their main melee thrust with some heavy firepower to reach out and make enemy tanks worry. Ballistas, Dreadnoughts and Vindicators maybe tend to be the most in fashion at the moment, though Space Marines have got plenty more usable stuff. Gladiator Lancers do armour really well. The Repulsor Executioner is nice enough, and some people like Desolation Squads in Gladius. Moving on from the datasheets and focusing on the supporting rules and detachments though, as their Space Marines, Dark Angels get Oath of Moment. So as ever, re-rolling the hit roll against one key target, Space Marines are going to be unusually good at taking down one really tough thing, and that can also be very nice with their unique units, maybe in particular the Inner Circle Companions. Against certain tough targets it might well be worth fishing for 6s with lethal hits, and can be used in a whole bunch of different ways, either focusing fire with a bunch of guns, helping you destroy the single biggest and nastiest threat in the enemy army, or if that's not going to be a particularly big issue, maybe helping out unusually tip the balance in one small positional fight. Dark Angels do have issues at the moment with their unique detachments being particularly strong. As mentioned earlier, the vast majority of people taking Dark Angels to competitive events tend to choose either Gladius or Stormlance. Both of those adding advance and charge to Inner Circle Companions and Deathwing Knights is a really big deal, but they have plenty of good things besides that as well. Taking a look at some data from StatCheck and Meta Monday, Gladius seems to be the most played, though has slightly lower win rates of around about 46%. People playing Stormlance tend to win a bit more, though there might be an element of the bias of the players that choose to play in that way, potentially. It looks like currently the most popular of their unique detachments is the Inner Circle Task Force, which is third, though has kind of dismal win rates on a competitive scene of around about 34%. It does seem significantly harder to win with. Beyond that, the Unforgiven, Lion's Blade, Company of Hunters, and the Vanguard Spearhead all see a bit of play. Out of those, it seems that the Company of Hunters tends to have the most tournament success, having some alright win rates and some high placings from time to time. There's not really a huge amount of data on any of them though. Let's take a look at a few of the detachments and a few strong lists. And starting out, we've got the most played in the Gladius Task Force, where they've got the core rule of combat doctrines, 3 turns of different move then damage effects, advance and charge, advance and shoot, and then fall back, shoot and charge. As mentioned, advance and charge is excellent for their on-foot elites. They can spend 1 command point to get that when they need it. A reactive move can be really big for both Inner Circle Companions and Deathwing Knights. The Lance Melee can be a very reliable extra source of damage, particularly when you get extra AP in Assault, and there's Fights on Death, Armour of Contempt, and an Ignore Cover Shooting attack too. I'd say the enhancements are usable, though not crazy standout. There's a 2+ save and a 5+ feel no pain one, which could work for a lone Gravis captain. Fire Discipline can give you sustained hits 1, which could be one option to pair with Hellblasters, though maybe you might just want Azrael there if you're using Hellblasters for damage in this detachment. There's a +1 strength and +1 attack in melee, which is quite nice for a fighty character. Going to a +2 of both in assault, that could be quite scary on a captain with some assault intercessors. For one example of a tournament-winning Dark Angels Gladius list, there's this one by Evan Stump, who used this to take first at a 40-player tournament. Unsurprisingly, there's Azrael leading the way. Looks like he's joining a squad of Inner Circle Companions here for a very scary melee deathball. There's 2 units of Deathwing Knights with Great Weapon and Maces to support, 3 squads of Jump Intercessors to jump around doing secondaries, a Lieutenant with Combi Weapon to screen parts of the board and do reactive move things, 3 Nuisance Invader ATVs with multi-melters, 2 sets of Scouts, so really between all that there's a massive amount of things for hoovering up the secondary objective points and doing skirmish things. And then as if that wasn't enough, there's a Calidus Assassin to help that further. This one really looks like a list that's going out of its way to score really big. Then finally there's some big heavy gun tanks. They've gone for a pair of Repulsor Executioners with heavy laser destroyers here, some massive anti-tank damage at long range, and plenty of spammed small arms fire to help out at close range too. Overall that feels at least somewhat typical for Dark Angels Gladius. Azrael with multiple Deathwing Knights units, some Inner Circle Companions, and making up the rest of the points between good Space Marine scoring stuff and a few big heavy guns. Otherwise, the other most played army is maybe the Stormlance Task Force. This is the one that gives everything advance and charge and fall back and charge all the time, both great things for standout melee units, and they also have a really powerful stratagem for a 6-inch reactive move when you get close, which is going to be a very easy one to get some big value out of, hiding things behind terrain, or backing away from charges so they can't hit you this turn. They also have lots of good stratagems for mounted units as well, which might encourage a few more Black Knights, Invader ATVs or Outriders. Here's one example Stormlance list that placed second at a grand tournament, this one by Matthias Damas, who placed second at Sao Paulo GT, going 4-1 at a field of 30 players. It's really not uncommon for these Stormlance lists to go very, very light on mounted units whatsoever, and this one seems to take absolutely none. We've got Azrael and a Judas here, who I'd guess would both go with the Inner Circle companion blocks. I suppose it's not impossible Azrael could just go with Intercessors and they go in alone. Seems more likely that he joins them though. We've also got Lionel Johnson here, for his big scary fights first melee threat. A lieutenant with a combi weapon could trigger his lone operative rule if there wasn't some other infantry nearby. And then compared with the last list, there's a bunch of objective skirmishing chaff. The Intercessors will be nice for their sticky objectives. There's just the 1 unit of jump Intercessors and 2 units of scout this time. It seems that rather than having objective units for days and some big heavy guns, there's instead 3 units of Deathwing Knights, and as mentioned that extra unit of Inner Circle companions and the line. So basically 6 absolutely enormous melee threats to throw into battle, 2 of which can fight first as well, which would be a big problem for melee armies. That's pretty scary stuff with all that able to advance and charge. For perhaps their most competitively successful unique detachments, next up let's focus on the Company of Hunters, and this one's the Ravenwing themed one, where everything can advance and shoot and fall back and shoot, and then mounted units also gets to advance and charge and fall back and charge as well, plus you're allowed to spam Outriders with Battle Line. They get a whole bunch of stratagem support to help out their various Ravenwing units. Fairly easy to get some value from -1 to hit, a +1 to wound, and the return to reserves one is quite nice as well. And the enhancements are particularly good for command squads leading big Black Knight units, generally tending to boil down to different ways to getting the Alpha Strike, a turn 1 strat reserve arrival, rerolling advance and charge moves for extra threat range, and a big scout's 9 inches. For one example of a list that did well with that one, and also pleasingly went very heavy on the biker theme, was this one by Jeffon's Bow, using this very biker heavy force to place third at NorCal Open GT. The big core threat of the army are 3 Ravenwing command squads, leading 3 squads of 6 Black Knights, so enormous threats both with plasma talons and then follow up devastating wound melee there. They're also big expensive units that really need to hit incredibly hard on the Alpha Strike and cause lots of disruption, as they're just not really all that hard to kill for the points when they're attacked back. Then beyond that there's a whole bunch of bikers to skirmish for objectives, 4 sets of Outriders, and 3 Invader ATVs, so going super heavy on the mounted, 1 unit of Infiltrators, presumably to hold down the deployment zone against enemy deep strikers, and then just in case the enemy tanks thought they could relax, there's no less than 3 Gladiator Lancers here, with their enormous armor-piercing rerolls. It's certainly really quite a skewed list that you need to make some really quite smart decisions for. It's really cool to see such a heavily flavoured Ravenwing army do so well. I suspect it probably would be made a little bit stronger by taking a few more of the Space Marine support units, but I guess going heavy on the units that can maximally use detachment rules doesn't hurt either. Otherwise beyond those I'll just touch on the other 3 Dark Angels detachments, though unfortunately there just aren't really very many good examples of them doing well in big tournaments. The Inner Circle Task Force definitely does add some value to Deathwing units. Their rule is to nominate other objectives that you don't hold as vowed targets, and then you get +1 to wound for Deathwing infantry against all the units in range of those objectives, which does help out a bit, though might not be super relevant for the Maces of Absolution against vehicle and monster targets. They've got further stratagems to increase the damage more than that, a turn 1 deep strike enhancement, a -1 to wound stratagem, and also a fights on death as well. Generally pretty handy support for the Deathwing Knight squads and Inner Circle companions, and you can get the Deathwing keyword and a bunch of other unusual units with the Dark Angels named characters too. Though I feel like it maybe falls down at a stronger sort of level of play, due to not really helping out all that much with mobility and getting the units to the fights that they need to reach. It just seems that maybe Gladius and Stormlance with the advance and charge to actually get the Deathwing Knights into combat nice and fast maybe adds a bit more than just giving them a little bit more might here. The Dark Angel's index successor detachment is the Unforgiven task force, and this one does have some interesting stratagem options, though the core theme of it, of units getting better when they're battle shocked, just never really seemed like a particularly great idea to start with, and I'm not sure what theming they were going for either. I get the idea of Space Marines fighting hard when under pressure, though it kind of feels unusual to have them actually literally fight better when they're being overwhelmed. The core rule gives you some OC manipulation, you never completely lose OC when battle shocked, and you can give 1 unit extra OC in your command phase. so a bit more weight on the primary there. It feels like their stratagems might be the more impressive side of things though, being able to flex into lethal hits. A fallback and shoot and charge certainly isn't bad. They've got a couple of helpful things to aid shooting, and a few interesting enhancements such as an ancient giving out a 6+ feel no pain, which could be to a big Terminator squad, or +1 attack, strength and damage, which is a really nice melee weapon upgrade. That'd be great on a Captain or Judas here or something. It definitely feels like there's some good value from these stratagems and enhancements. It's just perhaps a shame that the core rule is quite such a letdown for this one. Since it's come out, it's basically been seen as inferior to Gladius. Finally, for the Dark Angels unique ones, we've got the Lion's Blade Task Force. This one was the Grotmus detachment that they got, and the idea of this one is Deathwing and Ravenwing units fighting side by side. Deathwing getting a +2 to charge things that are in melee with Ravenwing, and Ravenwing making desperate escape tests happen. For stratagems, they got a 2 command point charge out of sequence one, which could certainly create an area denial zone around some Deathwing knights, some debuffs to enemy damage in close combat, and Ravenwing being able to move and charge through terrain, which is quite fun. If you're playing this one, you'd certainly want to go heavy on both the Deathwing and Ravenwing units. Ideally, it maybe feels best built for small cheap units of Ravenwing, things like Outriders or Invader ATVs, moving up and triggering the easy charges for the Deathwing to get them there. It just feels like really quite a lot of big investments and setup to get the rules working though, having to commit multiple units just to get your detachment rule working properly. And again, while it's seen some interest, just doesn't really seem to have had the success or the main focus for the Dark Angels that the Stormlance and Gladius have had. In any case, at the moment it seems that Dark Angels seem to be an army, mainly focusing around those 2 detachments, usually led by Azrael into battle in a competitive setting, with some punchy bricks of Deathwing Knights and Inner Circle companions to take down the foe in the midfield, and then being supported by a cluster of the Space Marine good objective support units, and maybe some big guns. I think it would be kind of nice if they did manage to make a fair few more units in the Codex viable. It does maybe feel a bit disappointing that there's so few datasheets that really seem to stand out, and the same is true for the detachments too. Most of the Dark Angels detachments do genuinely add some interesting things for the army, and I feel like all of them can be played pretty well in casual games. They definitely don't feel like they're optimal for the faction currently. We have had some rumours recently that Dark Angels should be getting a new detachment of some sort in the upcoming balance update. I'll not dwell on this too much and talk about it at the time if and when it happens. It probably seems worth mentioning. There were some rumours that they might be getting a bit of a return of the old Inner Circle rule with a -1 to wound infantry and mounted if the strength is greater than their toughness, and a few interesting stratagems on top of that. I guess the biggest question if so is whether or not it would be enough to outweigh the benefits provided by greater movement and reactive moves from Gladius and Stormlance. I guess we'll find out though, and I'll certainly look forward to reviewing the new Dark Angels detachment when it lands. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to the Unforgiven on the tabletop in Warhammer 40K right now. I'll look forward to hearing any thoughts and insights down in the comments below. Finally though, before I go, I'll just cycle back to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold, the makers of those magnetic carry cases talked about earlier that currently have their 25% off sale on. For an idea of their mag case designs, here's their tray capacity. Around about 90 odd infantry can fit on one of these levels, or around 6 knight armigers. And then within their range they've got various different heights of trays. The mini one's around $75, that's inclusive of shipping, though there may be VAT or sales tax depending on area. The small one being a more skirmish orientated case, though it can still fit some big tanks in as you can see. Otherwise they've got their more standard sized mag case, really quite a tall construction, big enough to hold an entire bulky Chaos Knight on the bottom floor as you can see here, and still have plenty of room for other stuff. I'll leave the prices on the screen and the internal dimensions. They also come with some magnets to attach to bases included too. Otherwise, here's their really big one, basically 2 of the previous attached together for a massive army size one. And as mentioned, if you're in the market for MDF terrain as well, they also do that, a little bit on the cheaper side, if you do pick up a mag case to go with it. In any case though, check them out, links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and would like to support, Auspex Tactics both has a Patreon page, links down in the video description, and also affiliate discount retailers as well, where you can get Warhammer cheaper than Games Workshop, and anything bought through those links helps to support the channel. A big thank you to anyone using those when they pick stuff up. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.